Kyle Klingman with Track Wrestling. We get a chance to dive into one of my favorite stories and what I consider one of the great success stories in wrestling. We're talking with Tom Slowey. He went to Penn State, but then started his own business at the age of 26 and then retired at the age of 38. We're going to go through all of that, but Tom, thanks for being part of this.
My pleasure. Thank you. Always nice to talk to Kyle Klingman.
I appreciate that. And it's always fun to go back to the beginning of anyone's story and just to find out how someone found wrestling and how it entered into a person's life. And I'm sure that you have a story that you can share with us.
Yeah, you just mentioned how you found wrestling, and it's one of the few things probably in my life that found me, not the other way around. And it's probably also the reason I started very late, at least as it relates to others in the community I grew up in, which was a steel town in Pennsylvania, Bethlehem Steel. I grew up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And most young men, kids, children, started wrestling in 4th and 5th grade. There were all kinds of wrestling programs. And I remember one of the strongest was the CYO, or Catholic Youth Organization programs. Almost every church had a youth team, and these young men, these children, were wrestling at a very, very early age. And although I knew about wrestling and I loved it and respected it, I had never done it. And to take a step back, the part about loving it and respecting it was my father never wrestled. He was a big-time college football player. In fact, but he loved wrestling. And we lived just over the hill from Lehigh University, which has then and still has an incredible D1 wrestling program. But he was very good friends with Larry Sheridan, who was the announcer for all the meets. And his father was a Hall of Fame coach, Mr. Sheridan. And so we knew the family. And through them, we were able to get really good seats to the matches, which were always packed. It was in Grace Hall, which they used to call the Pit. And it was awesome because we had 4 season tickets. And the front of my sneakers, I actually remember, would touch the edge of the mat. That's how close we were. And so it was very, very cool and a treat to be able to go along with my dad to the matches. And that's when I really had my eyes open to what wrestling is all about. And, my earliest heroes, other than my father, were these wrestlers I got to watch because I saw it was plain as day, the shape you had to be in, the mental and physical toughness you had to have to compete at that level. Obviously, the technique was obvious, and I loved it. And so I had people like Mike Caruso, who I had heard of, didn't get to watch. He was earlier, but Mike Frick, Tom Scully, national champ, the Lieberman brothers. It was fun for me to watch all that. So, I had an exposure to it, but again, never did it. And when it found me was I was at Bethlehem Catholic High School, a freshman. Many folks who follow wrestling will know that that's one of the top high school programs in the country and has been for years. Well, here I am, going there, and I played football and decided to go out for basketball. And freshmen only had one gym. We had the lousiest time for practice. It was 7 a.m. And I lived 13 miles from the school, so it was tough for me to get there on time every day for practice. And most days I ended up hitchhiking. And obviously, I was late sometimes. And that caused a problem, which I understood. And the coach said, hey, this isn't going to work unless you get here every day. And I realized the writing was on the wall, so I, backed off. It was 3 days later, and Tony Izello, who was the Hall of Fame wrestling high school coach at Bethlehem Catholic, comes up to me at lunch and goes, hey, Tom, why don't you come out for wrestling? And I looked at him like, Coach, I never did that. But, why me? You guys are so good. You don't need someone like me. I've never wrestled. He goes, yeah, but I watched you play football and all that stuff. You're a big, strong, intelligent kid. I think you'd be a good wrestler. So I said, it's interesting. Well, what time do you practice? Because I had just gotten through that early morning thing. He said, after school. I said, yes, sir, I'll be there. And the rest is history. But that's how wrestling found me.
And then Penn State was the next place or the next stopping point for you. Why Penn State? Why was that the fit over Lehigh, which you just mentioned as being part of your roots?
Well, I wasn't a five-star recruit kind of guy, you know. I wasn't, you know, the young man every team was looking for. I was certainly one of the best in the area, probably the state. But it came down to probably that Lehigh had a pretty good bunch of young men at the 177 and 92 pound weight class, and they did. I knew that. Also, the coach's nephew happened to be at that weight, so I mean, I didn't hear a whole lot from Lehigh, but I did from Penn State. So, a lot of it is those kind of things. But, what made it easy for me was that I was that young man who had a Penn State Nittany Lion light switch, cover at the house. The posters in the room were the Nittany Lion football posters. Everything about me was Penn State. For me, it'd be, man, if I could be a Nittany Lion someday, that'd be awesome. But of course, I never thought about wrestling. The dream was always maybe football, or just going there as a student would have been wonderful. So it was a dream opportunity for me. I love Penn State. Rich Lorenzo was very special. He was very different. Even when he came to recruit and talk to me, he was just well, first of all, a bear of a man, a big, strong bear of a man. But he was quiet. He was low key. He was almost gentle in a way that you hear about people talking about, that gentle giant. And I like that demeanor about him. And the thing that I caught on to that was really different from anybody else, or, frankly, anything I experienced in my life, was Rich Lorenzo actually wanted me to come to Penn State. And I think there's a lot to be said for somebody wanting you and believing in you. And that meant a lot to me. And turns out that he gave me the opportunity of a lifetime. And in terms of later on and through the years, I found that he was everything he was during those meetings and talks we had during the recruiting time. He cared about the wrestling part. I mean, he had to. His job was to create a top-notch D1 team. But he clearly also cared about, and I got the sense it was even more important to him to make sure that you learned that there's other things in life. That you need to be good to people. You need to be responsible. You need to be accountable. You need to be humble and respectful. And he taught that by example. And I never heard him curse. I know he wasn't a drinker, which neither here nor there, but that was pretty awesome. Although he did drink a 6-pack of Pepsi at every practice. I don't know how he did that, but he was just that kind of guy that over time you could see and tell that he cared about you. And you were important. Quick story, I was a freshman. I was a nobody just getting going, and there was a Thanksgiving or whatever break it was. We had a couple of days off and things were shutting down, and coach said, see you in a couple of days. And well, I didn't really have a ride home. And it was it just was what it was. It was 3.5 hours. I could have probably found one asking around or hitched one, but I'm like, yeah. So my idea was to kind of sneak into the dorm to just lay low and hang there until everybody came back. And he got word. And he sat me down and said, is what I'm hearing true, Slowey? I go, yes, sir, it is. He said, look, I'll give you a ride home. And he did. My mom loved him from that day on. She couldn't believe it. She came out to meet him. They talked, had a coffee and whatnot. But to this day, my mom asks how Coach Lorenzo is doing. And nobody does that. And that's the kind of man he is. He changed my life. He gave me an opportunity. He gave me an opportunity to go to a great school, to wrestle for Penn State, the school of my dreams. And he gave me the opportunity to make something of myself. And I always remembered that. And I have to say, even though I wasn't an All-American or even one of the top 5 best wrestlers in that room, I gave him everything I had every day, both in the classroom and on the mat, because of what he gave me. And I'll have to say this. Other than my father, he is without a doubt the greatest life example I've ever had the privilege to be associated with.
So when you look back, Tom, on your Penn State experience, just take us through the wrestling part and then the education or the academic part. Which had more value for you in the long run?
The answer is both. I didn't differentiate because I knew they were huge. I knew I was there to get an education. I also understood I wasn't Cael Sanderson. I knew there was really nothing for me after wrestling, but it didn't mean I wasn't going to give everything I had every day in there for the team, for the sport, for my coach. But I knew education was for a lifetime. I understood that wrestling was for 4, maybe 5 years with a red shirt. And so I knew how important they both were, but for different reasons.
And then you're in your early 20s at that point, and let's fast forward to age 26. You start a software company. How do you make such a quick transition into starting a company and getting well on your way to being successful?
Well, a lot of times when you're young like that, you don't know what you don't know, I guess, a little bit. And that's part of it. But the other thing was, I'd have to say that I had spent 3 years, maybe 4 years by that time, working at another company with some really, really impressive people that I very much liked and respected. And so when that company got bought out in a hostile takeover, we were kind of all sitting around, thinking about, hey, what's next? And it came up, we didn't really want to stay with the new company that acquired us because, none of us were really that thrilled with the management and how they went about acquiring us, although it was fair and legal. And it came around to, hey, maybe we can do our own thing. And actually the founder or co-founder of the previous company, DBMS Incorporated, was one of the folks we were sitting around in a room with. And he was really the genius, the one with the brainchild. He was it. And he just, I feel blessed. He felt I was a key part of, a future career and a new company. I mean, I was in charge of West Coast sales for him, sales and marketing, and I'd done a really good job. And I think he just saw a lot in me. And, it's one of those things that I believe that if you work hard every day, do the right things, really listen, just not hear, and watch, that sooner or later, you'll have success. And sooner or later, someone will notice. And he happened to be one of those people that noticed and gave me the opportunity. And it was just like with Coach Lorenzo. I was all in, and I was going to give everything I had for that man and this opportunity. Now, the question of why was I willing to say yes when 99% of people go, wow, that's a little too much. I think I'm good. And I have to go back to how I was raised. My father was a phenomenal father, and I lost him way too early while I was in college. But by the time I was 10 years old, I think he had taught me most of the important and key things that one needed to know in life. So I was good there. But I go back to wrestling. Everything wrestling taught me was exactly what I faced, other than you weren't wrestling out there in the real world. It was hard work. It was getting up early. It was listening. It was learning technique. It was doing your best. It was learning from your mistakes. It was getting, not being afraid to fail. It was resilience. It was persistence. It was determination. It was commitment. And it was this understanding that nothing's easy. The long days you put in at Penn State going to classes, and then, in the morning doing your runs, and then going to practice, and then 4 days a week having to come back at night to do your weight program, and all those things, you have to learn time management. You learn your days full. You learn it's not an 8-hour day. You learn problems aren't 9 to 5, and so a lot of these things I learned from wrestling, and I took just innately, into my personal life and business life. So I wasn't particularly fazed by a whole lot out there, but I had a good base to work from, and I give wrestling almost all the credit for that.
So take that component you talked about. You said, hey, you didn't really reach the highest level in wrestling, but you worked your tail off. Was that an advantage in the long run that you didn't see the success, but you knew how to keep grinding even through all of that?
Without a doubt. I've hired over 1,000 people in my life, and I always looked for that type of mentality, that kind of attitude. You can see it in their eyes. things they say. You know, maybe the resume gives you a little hint about maybe some background with extracurricular activities. I personally love to see someone that committed to some kind of athletic program, hopefully at least in a high school level. At a college level, it was great. I mean, I definitely would put those resumes aside and give them a shot on that first interview just from seeing that. But I totally believe that it was a blessing that I had to go that route rather than maybe be that person with a boatload of talent that needed to be refined. Don't get me wrong, you have to put the effort in and work and improve yourself, no matter how much natural talent you have. But you know, I really did have to work. I had to start from scratch in high school and learn the basic technique while everybody was way ahead of me. I mean, I was learning things senior year in high school that I should have known freshman year. But I welcome that. And I didn't see it then. I just thought that's the way it was for everybody. And so that's what I did. And but later on in life, you realize that it's not that way for everybody and that it's an absolute blessing to have it that way. You appreciate things more. You go through tougher times. You lose more and decide how you have to handle that. You get back up after getting beaten more. So those things are very, very valuable. I think if I hadn't gone through that, I'm not sure I would even have said yes to the opportunity, much less have had success with it if I happened to say yes. So without a doubt.
You, as we mentioned, you get into this company and start a company from scratch at the age of 26 and you retire at 38. That's a pretty long NFL career, but for normal work life, that's really, really early. What did you have to put in those 12 years in order to accomplish some high level of success?
I didn't really think about it. I just did it. You know, wrestling, if you give it a chance, if you do it long enough, and instill certain positive traits within you that become a part of you. I mean, you know, I mentioned earlier when we were talking off camera about getting up early. I'm a morning person. That was part of my discipline and habit formation through wrestling. You had to get up early, get your runs in and all that. So it wasn't something I had to like really think about. I just had to keep doing what I was doing and remember to be humble enough to keep your ears open and your eyes open and listen and watch and get better and learn from your mistakes. But the work ethic, the perseverance, the commitment, the determination, the persistence, they were already there and they were ingrained. And that just it kind of worked that way. And I had no feeling for what a long day was, what a short day was. Frankly, a lot of times I didn't even know what day it was, and it really didn't matter. It was hour 58, and in 10 hours I had to have this particular project finished and, you know, or have to be, you know, in this particular country pitching a deal or whatever. You just did it. You didn't really think about it. And you kind of go on autopilot, which I'm very thankful for, frankly. So it was just more of doing what I had learned earlier in life. And it wasn't about starting a company to be rich. It was more about, man, I don't think I want to keep doing this with that company that bought us. I like the people I worked with. I like this core bunch of folks that wants to start this new company. That it was more about that. And the success came with the success, I guess, financial success too, but I never did it for that. I did it because I like a challenge. And I didn't particularly like someone coming in and putting into a company like that. It was okay, fair, and righteous, but I just, you know, it was all right. We're gonna do this. We'll show you, and that's how I felt, and we did it. So it wasn't complicated, and I think sometimes people overcomplicate things, but that's another story. If you know something works, keep doing it.
Let's go through two of your mantras and things that you live by. Let's go with number one, success is a choice. I think you have business cards and it says that on there.
I do.
What does that mean to you?
Well, again, I learned that through wrestling. To be honest with you, you know, if you ask me, what are some of the key things I learned from wrestling other than those positive life traits? I learned to seek excellence in all endeavors. I mean, in that wrestling room, I remember talking to my mother, maybe the second week I was there. She said, "Hey, how's it going?" I go, "Great, I love it. It's hard though, Mom. It's hard. These wrestlers are good." I said, "You know what? I have to go 100% every second I'm in there, even if we're just drilling, or I'll get hurt. And she looks at me like, oh my goodness, what do you mean? I said, everybody's so good. You have to be on top of it at all times. I said, but I love it. And I don't know what else to say.
Well, how about your next one? Take care of the little things and the big things will take care of themselves.
Take care of little things, big things will take care of themselves. Yeah, absolutely. Too many people forget or never learn, unfortunately, that things just don't happen. You can't just, set goals. You actually have to do the little things every day that helps you, get closer and closer to those goals. And the little things do matter. A thank you matters. A wave to somebody matters. Do what you say you're going to do. If you say you're going to be there at 9 o'clock, be there at 8:45, sitting outside ready to go. Don't make people wait. The little things matter. And frankly, it's not only because it's the right thing to do and it breeds success, but it's respectful of others to be that way. And I think it's very important. Take care of the little things. And I believe the big things will take care of themselves. And you mentioned success as a choice. I addressed that issue of seeking excellence in all endeavors, but success is a choice, in my opinion, because you make a decision on what you want to do and where you want to go. And success, your definition, too many people, I think, believe success is financially oriented. I don't mean it that way. I mean, in terms of your own life, what's important to you, define that as success and then go get it. Don't wait for it to happen, because it won't. It's not something that is given to you. It's something you earn. You have to go out there and work hard every day and deserve it. It's not a birthright. It's not a divine right. It's not an accident. Success is a choice.
You retired.
Pretty simple.
Yeah, and you retired at 38. What went into that? Why did you decide at 38 it was time to step away from being in the business world?
Well, at 38 is when we got acquired. And as part of the acquisition, a handful of the key employees, the same folks that started the company in essence, were placed on a non-compete for several years. So as part of the acquisition, we actually had to stay out of the software business for a multitude of years as part of the deal. And you could argue that with workers' rights and all that and whatever, but the truth of the matter was, if you argued it, the deal wasn't going to happen. And that would have affected a lot of other people other than us 4 or 5. And so that was it. I was basically forced into retirement. It wasn't something I welcomed or wanted. I loved what I was doing. I loved the action. I loved the challenge. I loved the responsibility. I loved the leadership. I loved everything about it. And when it happened, it was frankly a big bummer. But you learn to adjust. I actually did some consulting work for a couple of years after that, and the same group of folks started another company called Divine Interventures, where we help smaller technology companies, for the most part, and others, but help them either go public or improve their operations to the point where they could grow or be bought out, and that kind of thing. So it was a management kind of opportunity. I did that for a few years, and I did interim CEO positions at a couple of places, and helped other organizations with their marketing and sales programs, their compensation plans, their pricing plans. But the bottom line was, while I was doing that, I found myself on the road as much or even more than I was during those 12 years with Platinum Technology. I was never home. And that was one of the toughest things. That, when you're running sales and marketing, or sales particularly, you have to go where the deals are, and you have to lead and manage, and you're not home a whole lot. And my children were young, and I was realizing that they really didn't know who I was. And so, there was one evening I was trying to get back to the airport, and it was the night before Thanksgiving, and it was about 9 o'clock, and I realized even the taxi cab guys had gone home to relax, and I couldn't even get a cab to the airport. And I looked up and said, what am I doing? And so for me, it was more a decision ultimately, and this was at about the age of 40, where I said, hey, look, I've been blessed. I think I can get by financially. I want to be home with my children. I want them to know me growing up. I want to coach them in sports. I want to be at the plays. I want to be at their events. I want to be there to support them. It was way more important to me than financial success or being the next CEO of some software company or whatever. And so I made that decision, and it's been a trip. I've learned about some other businesses and got into them. And I'm proud to say that my children will always remember me as always being around, maybe too much. But it was a good decision for me, and I'm glad I did it.
There's a perception that once you receive or achieve material success that you're somehow above or have some inherent rights. But in watching you interact with people, you've always stayed humble. You've always been that servant mentality. How have you maintained that over the years?
Upbringing, for one. Wrestling, again, teaches you a lot of things. And I'll say one of the things it teaches, I think, almost everybody, not everybody, whether or not you accept it and understand it is one thing, but it teaches you humility. Because unless you're Dan Gable or John Smith or Cael Sanderson, you get beat. And in my case, I got beat more than I like to admit, and sometimes I got hammered. And when you get beat like that, it's one-on-one, you against that person, and that person looks you right in the eye and gets their hand raised right next to you in front of a lot of people. And if that doesn't teach you humility, nothing will. Also, the respect for your opponents and for your teammates, understanding how hard wrestling is. It isn't something you try. You know, you don't just try wrestling, you commit to it, or you're not going to last a day, much less a week. So you have that respect for the sport and your teammates because you understand personally how hard it is and what it takes to even have a modicum of success in the sport, even to get through one season. So, you know, those things kind of, you know, if you needed it, they round you off a little bit. And there's nothing wrong with humility. I mean, for me, it's, you know, some people connotate it negatively, like saying, you don't think you're as good or as other folks. And my definition of humility or being humble has nothing to do with that. It's a very positive trait, I believe. And it's simply being modest. It's having a modest opinion of your own importance. It's being unassuming. It's lacking arrogance. There's nothing wrong with that. Wrestling helped teach me that.
You are in California right now, and you're part of a high school wrestling program. How has that kept you engaged with wrestling and been beneficial in your life?
It's been great. And in fact, as part of that decision to not get back on the road and get into the business and be home more for my children and to be coach and whatnot, I found myself that I went from maybe being the busiest person I knew to, you know, almost instantly having nothing to do really. And I had to find ways to keep myself busy. Obviously, being home with your children and a beautiful, wonderful wife and following them and coaching them help. But if you're smart, when you retire, you have to find a way. I think if you're smart, you have to find a way to stay busy. And wrestling, coaching wrestling was another way for me to stay busy. And again, it's something that found me. One day somebody asked, hey, I hear you were a wrestler. We need some help over at the high school. And, you know, that's how it happened. And so I did it. And it's been 19 years. I thought it'd be a year or two, but it's been 19 years. And I love it. It keeps me young. It gives me an opportunity to give back to a sport that did so much for me, which just wouldn't have felt right that if I had the opportunity to do that and was asked and had the time and was healthy enough to do so, couldn't imagine saying no. And you know, I laugh. I tell the athletes, you know, I get way more out of this than you do. And they laugh at them. What do you mean, coach? I go, you guys keep me young. You get me out of the house. You know, you keep me busy. I love it. It helps me stay healthy. You know, I don't want to go into that wrestle room and not be able to show things and be in shape enough to kind of do what's right as far as coaching goes. And so it gets me into the weight room and gets me out working out and running and doing things like that. So it's been great for me. It also gives me an opportunity to teach about life to these young athletes. 10 years ago, you said young men, but now we've got a girls program too, so it's awesome. But the fact that they know I know wrestling as well as most anybody, at least on that level, and can help them and teach them, and I'm willing to do it, gives me a credibility with them. And over time, you earn respect. I mean, by showing you care about them, and by doing the right things in practice. And with that, you have their ear now. So it's easy for me to do what I think is really the most important thing, is to help teach them life. And if nothing else, it's how to look someone in the eye and shake their hand. It's how to say yes, sir, and no, sir. It's how to, when your mom asks you to do something, say, yes, mom, thank you. It's teaching them that wrestling, like life, is every day, not just when you feel like it. It's every day. And when you come in this room, I want your best effort. And best effort every day in all things is very, very important. I didn't say you have to be a state champ. I didn't say you have to win every time. You don't have to get an A on every report. Give your best effort. And you know what that is, because you can look in the mirror and you can't fib to yourself. So, those are the kinds of things I try to teach them. And partly by being there every day myself, and being on time every day myself, and being there for the matches and the tournaments. But it's been a blessing to me, and I've had the opportunity and privilege to affect, I believe, a lot of young men and women's lives.
What was that like when Cael Sanderson came on board at Penn State and to be part of 8 of the last 9 NCAA championships?
Well, first of all, I remember I was driving up into the mountains with a couple of Sea-Doos to go on some vacation with the family, and I got a phone call and heard about it. And I knew we were working on it, we saying Penn State folks. But did I really think we had a chance? Not really. It was just, boy, that would be great. And when I heard it happen, I just kind of remember shaking my head going, wow. And I was in shock, actually, because this is Iowa State guy, coaching at Iowa State, making a decision to come to Pennsylvania. And so I just didn't think it would happen. But when I heard about it, I was so happy. I believed he would be a great coach for us. And obviously his name and his success would help with recruiting. I didn't know as much about his personality as I do now, but it's awesome the way he's just so level-headed and even keel with the wrestlers. And I love his coaching style. So that's been a bonus that I really didn't know about. But it's a thrill, and it's a blessing, and it's a privilege for Penn State to have him coaching us. And I'm just very, very thankful and happy about it.